Hello, welcome to Jewish Museum Milwaukee's Museum Moments. My name is Ellie Gettinger, and I'm here to share stories from our museum community. Today, we have a very special museum moment for us. We are going to be talking to Wendy Kahl from the Peshtigo Fire Museum. And Wendy is their curator and coordinator there. And this is an important landmark week for the Peshtigo Fire Museum, because this is the 150th anniversary. It was on October 8th, the 150th anniversary of the Peshtigo Fire. So Wendy, thank you for joining us. Can you tell us a little about the Peshtigo Fire and what it's known for and its kind of historic importance?
Okay. Well, Peshtigo was a lumbering community surrounded by dense forests all around. If you want to go to that first picture there, there was the city in the center, and then, back in the areas, it's all dense forest. There was one way into town and one way out of town. And as I said, it was a lumbering community. We had the world's largest woodenware factory, which was owned by William Ogden, who was the first mayor of Chicago. And wood from Peshtigo helped build Chicago, as a matter of fact. There were poor lumberjack practices. The lumberjacks, they would cut down the trees, take what they needed, and burn the rest. They were building a railroad. There was also a railroad being built from Green Bay to Escanaba, which is in the UP. Again, same thing. Just get rid of it all in the way, burn it. And farmers, there was Homestead Act, and they would clear the land, take what they needed, and burn the rest. So with 1871, it was a very hot and dry summer. The winter before had been hardly any snow. And the reason why the snow the winter before was kind of important, because there were also peat bogs in the area. So there were fires burning underneath the ground. Oh. Lumberjacks and little kids, they'd come across little fissures of fire in the ground leading from one tree to another, and the kids would play with them, jump over them.
And so you're already kind of building in this story right now that we have about fire maintenance and all of these things we need to do to control fire so they don't get out of control. All of these things are already at play in Peshtigo before this fire is happening.
Only they were ignorant to safe fire practices.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So that summer in 1871, they were kind of used to fires. There were several times the men would be called to different areas to go put out a fire. And on October 8th, there was a weather system that came in kind of like from the southwest area. And what they think happened is that it picked up all these little fires that weren't fully extinguished, combined it into one big, huge fire. And by the time it reached Peshtigo, I don't think there's any one original spot of it. But by the time it reached Peshtigo, it was literally a fire tornado. Firestorm, its own weather phenomenon. It reached... Some say it reached 1,000 feet up in the air, and the swirling winds were like half to 3/4 of a mile, or the swirling flames were half to 3/4 of a mile, and the fire destroyed the city in 1 hour.
Oh, wow. And do you know if that wind weather system was the same weather system affecting Chicago that day? Was it the same? Were they in the same, or was this just happenstance that the Great Peshtigo Fire and the Great Chicago Fire happened to coincide?
Everyone kind of had the same weather patterns that summer. Chicago was hot and dry also. They had the winds come in. I don't think they know exactly how their fire started, except it was not Mrs. O'Leary's cow.
It's not Mrs. O'Leary's cow.
No. But their fire was substantially, I'm looking for that map picture, which...
I think you put it last. Because I changed.
Oh no, did we lose it? Closed it out, darn it.
Well, I can attest for the fact that the Peshtigo fire, the Chicago fire is like a centimeter to the miles and miles and miles of the Peshtigo fire in terms of the area that was affected.
In the Peshtigo fire, there was 1.2 million acres burned. The Chicago fire was around 2,000.
Wow. And the number of people there were more people killed in Peshtigo than in the Chicago fire as well.
Absolutely. Chicago fire had around 300 people dead, and the Peshtigo fire, it was anywhere from 1,500 to 2,500. There's estimates. They just don't know exactly because, birth records were destroyed. But there's farmers out in the field that had babies and didn't account for them. But then also, people were coming into town all the time to work at the sawmills, build the railroad. And in fact, the day before the fire, 200 men had come into town to work.
Oh, my.
Most of the people Go ahead.
Yeah. Well, no, I'm just thinking about in a town, how big was Peshtigo before the fire? Like if 1,500 to 2,000 people were killed, how many people were there? What were the population estimates anyway prior?
The population estimates in the community of Peshtigo was around 1,700. And in the community of Peshtigo, 800 people died. So almost half the population in the community died. People who lived in the surrounding areas, that's where some more of the death total knows. There was one survivor, and he said 2 out of every 3 people that he knew perished in the fire.
That kind of mortality rate is just that's unthinkable. It's so hard to imagine. Literally, there is no one in this whole area that probably was untouched. If it wasn't their family, it was their neighbor. And I'm guessing that most people, it was in their own families, in their houses. What are we looking at here?
This was a thriving community. The first time I looked at these pictures, I'm going to click on a couple more. Like this picture, I looked at it and I thought, well, there's nothing there. There's nothing there. And as I was thinking about it, it's like, that's the point. There's nothing there. That was a thriving community with kids running around with yo-yos, chasing dogs, and there's nothing left. It was ash.
Wow. How did the community rebuild after this? Especially houses were just decimated. I'm sure everything was wood. Yes. So there, and city properties and stuff like that. Also, how did they get the energy to rebuild? What were the kinds of ways in which they rebuilt? Did they just rebuild right on top of the space that had been burned, or did they move the town at all?
No, they built right where they were. Isaac Stevenson, he was a lumber baron in Marinette, which is a city about 7 miles away. He helped rebuild. And William Ogden did help rebuild also. He rebuilt a sawmill, but not the woodenware factory in Peshtigo. Never became it was an industry leader in paper and wood products back then. And it never became it again, but it did survive. The interesting story about our museum. The Catholic Church was obviously burnt in the Peshtigo fire. They rebuilt it, and there's a couple more interesting. I forgot about that. I was going to tell about the museum first. So they rebuilt it, and in 1927, the Catholic Church was struck by lightning and burnt down again. At the time, there was a congregational church across the river, which was not being used, so they sold it to the Catholics, and it had to be moved from one side of the bridge to the other. And if you share my screen, you can see the bridge being moved across the river. It took several days. The bridge was shut off for several days, and then they used a winch, and when they got it in the spot, they put it down, and there was a little kid there who said it's backwards, and they had to lift it up, turn it around, and set it down again.
Amazing.
Yeah. But if you want to go to those artifacts, I will tell you about a couple of them.
So this is the Peshtigo Fire Museum's website, and these are some of the things on display at the Peshtigo Fire Museum.
Yes. Some people have made comments that you don't have very much of the fire itself. Well, it's because the entire city was destroyed. There was nothing left. Some people, they buried some things, and that may or may not have worked. But kind of the jewel, the miracle that we have is in the middle, that white box. So Father Pernin was the priest of the Catholic Church, and he wanted to save, like the communion hosts and the chalice. And so he went to the tabernacle, which is a box that Catholics keep that in. He went to get those contents out and bring them to the river. He dropped the key because he was frazzled. So he just took the whole box, put it on a wagon, and pushed it as far into the river as it would go. He had realized that he can't be concerned about that, and he went about saving himself and others. The next day, the tabernacle was gone, and they thought it burned up just like everything else. 2 days later, men came running to him. Father, it's a miracle. It's a miracle. We found the tabernacle. It was found floating on logs in the river, totally undamaged by smoke, fire, water. And the condition that it's in now is the condition that it was in then.
Wow. That's amazing. And I can see from this picture, even though it's small, you can see it's like in good shape. It looks good. It's and it doesn't look burnt. It's white. No. So that's amazing.
Well, and to further put it into perspective, a couple things. When people were in the water, they had most of the people who survived. Sorry if I'm skipping around some.
No, you're fine.
Most of the people who survived, they had gone into the river. There were some people who went down wells thinking that they'd be safe, and some were. But if the fire went right over them, the fire would suck the oxygen out of the well, and they'd suffocate.
Oh.
So the people who did make it to the river, even though the city burned in an hour, they had to stay in there all night because the ground was too hot to walk on. It was still smoldering. And while they were in there, they had to keep wetting their hair. They'd splash the water and they'd keep wetting their hair, because if they didn't, their hair would catch on fire. It was the
and
air
it's October, so it's not like it's a warm night. I mean, I'm sure it was in the 40s or 50s.
Yeah. Unfortunately, people did die of hypothermia. People died of drowning because when they were in the river, they're in there with burning logs, wild animals, tame animals, and everyone is fighting for survival. But this box stayed in perfect condition without any sparks or ashes or anything getting to it.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
As we're kind of wrapping up here today, just you guys, this has been a big couple of weeks and more in getting ready for this anniversary. What are some of the things that you guys did to commemorate the 150th anniversary of the Peshtigo Fire?
The city of Peshtigo had Peshtigo Historical Days back in late September, and there were reenactments, lumberjacks, Native American shows. But the Historical Society, we had a ice cream social and a museum walk where people would walk into there's a cemetery. I said museum walk. I meant cemetery walk. People would walk through the cemetery and get the stories of some of the people who were there, who are buried there, and if they made it or didn't make it. On October 8th, we had a new monument that was done this year, and we had a dedication of that in the morning, and then at 6:30 at night, we had a gathering at the river, and we kind of told the story leading up to the fire. And then there was a lantern, flashlight, candlelight walk to the museum, which is about 2 blocks away. And there were more stories about the aftermath of the fire. And we had a couple of survivors, descendants who spoke about how they survived and how they went on to rebuild.
Wow.
Because we did persevere. We did rebuild.
It sounds really powerful. I know I did also want to hear about your museum, which is open to the public. You guys, if you're in Peshtigo, you can come check out.
Not yet.
Not yet? Okay.
We are open from Memorial Weekend until October 8th.
Ah, okay.
So this is our
plan your summer trips.
Yeah, absolutely. We had people from every state except for Vermont this year. Wow. And about 9 countries, which is about half of what we normally have. We usually have 20 to 25 different countries. We have well over 1,000 people in every month, except for it has been terribly busy these past couple months, with people wanting to know. It was the 150th anniversary of the fire. The Historical Days weekend, we had about 700 people in just on 2 days.
Wow.
It was a little crazy then.
Yeah. And how did the museum get its start?
Well, 58 years ago, there was a group of people. They started cleaning up the cemetery. The cemetery was there from after the fire, and they decided to start cleaning it up. And as they're cleaning it up, the church right next to it was empty, and they started thinking, well, we should preserve the history of Peshtigo too. So they started taking donations. There were donations of some articles related directly to the fire, but most of the museum is time period pieces and what you would see back then. And it's set up by rooms, and we have quite a bit of area. You walk in and it's a church, but then we have a basement and an annex, and we have a mass grave in the cemetery with 350 bodies that were burnt beyond recognition are buried. Some stories by each of the graves, by some of the graves that tell the story of the people buried there. It's definitely a place to visit, and we get a lot of compliments on it.
Well, I know I will have to make my way up there next, maybe definitely in the summer sometime.
Yeah. Memorial Day weekend, we open again, and we're open every day from 10 to 4.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Wendy, for joining us. Thank you all for joining us for this museum moment, and we look forward to seeing you next week.
Thank you.